Hello, folks. Welcome to the Crime Dawg podcast. I'm your host, Johnny FIORICA, retired detective with the Rochester, New York Police Department after serving 30 years. Sitting alongside me, my trusted co-host, also a retired detective with the Rochester, New York Police Department, David Simpson. Folks, if you want to see the expansive experience that we have and the wealth of knowledge relative to law enforcement, you could check out our bios on our Spotify and YouTube channels, or you can go to our website, thecrimedawgpodcast.com. While you're there, check out our cool merch store. Dave, welcome to the podcast, brother.
Happy to be here. Big one today.
We do got a big one today, right?
No, it's important.
It's important. And kudos to you for setting this up. David, we're going to have a guest on, Senator Pam Helming. She's from Senate District 54. She's going to be on. She represents the Finger Lakes region. Her and Sheriff Baxter, she being a Republican, Sheriff Baxter being a Democrat, they proposed legislation called the PROTECT Act, and that is an acronym for Pretrial Risk Overview for Threat Evaluation, Custody, and Treatment. So the PROTECT Act was presented by Sheriff Baxter and Senator Helming, and it has some slight modifications to what you and I have talked about for months and months and months relative to some common sense legislation to modify criminal justice reform.
Yeah, I think it's very important that this gets done. The thing that I really like about this is that it puts it on the judges to be able to kind of use the federal idea where threat to public safety, dangerousness can be considered for holding someone in custody. You know, and I've always beat the drum on that for a long time now.
Yeah, the dangerous standard is something that you and I have talked about extensively. Sheriff Baxter has talked about it extensively. And literally, it is truly common sense. Like we say, our tagline is finally common sense has arrived. This is common sense legislation, folks. So without further ado, we want to introduce Senator Pam Helming to the podcast. Senator, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And more importantly, I want to thank you for both of you for your service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate that. You know, we just want you to walk our audience through, because, you know, David and I, we've talked and we beat the drum relative to, okay, maybe criminal justice reform wasn't the best prior to 2020, but literally it literally did a 180 after 2020, after January 2020. And we've been talking about modifications to it. We've had extensive conversations with our law enforcement brothers and sisters saying, hey, some things need to be modified. Let's scale some of these things back. I think that you and Sheriff Baxter nailed it with this PROTECT Act. Can you walk our audience through the top 4 points of what your PROTECT Act actually is trying to accomplish?
Sure. What I'd like to start by saying is that, you know, there were changes made to our criminal justice system in 2019, right? And I could say that the majority of us felt that some changes were needed, but we went too far. And I get the people who pushed for those extreme measures, but look how many years it's been and what we've seen happening, not only in Rochester or Monroe County, but across the state of New York, right? It's okay as legislators to say, okay, we tried something. It's not working exactly the way we want it to, so we need to tweak it. I had been pushing for that for several years now. And when it hit me that I wasn't going to get any of my colleagues across the political aisle to run with this, since they're in the majority, I started working with Sheriff Baxter and the Consortium for Safe Communities and so many others to say, what common sense goals can we achieve to really roll back some of those reforms? And what we wound up coming up with was a PROTECT Act. And as you said, it basically gives back to judges and our courts the ability to determine if a person is a threat to themselves, to others, or to the community as a whole, and if they are, to be able to hold them pre-trial.
Yeah, you know, it's prioritizing community safety. When I saw that on your website, I'm like, that is such a great way to phrase it, because if nothing else, especially our victims, right? We've seen it in law enforcement, Senator, over the course of our careers. Even though we had arrested a perpetrator, for example, if it was a male and female domestic, we had times when, even back 20-something years ago, where the male had somehow, some way got released from custody and then reoffended with the same victim. So to prioritize specifically the community, but really the victim from getting re-victimized is a huge thing.
Exactly. And so what the PROTECT Act does in regard to repeat offenders, it basically says if you're out pre-trial and you're accused of committing a felony or a Class A misdemeanor, and you commit another felony or another Class A, then you are mandated. The courts have the ability and authority under the PROTECT Act to hold that person pretrial. And I think that's what we need. Like, that's the piece that we really need that's really missing. We've seen in Rochester, like with that 9-year-old boy in Henrietta who was, at a convenience store checking out with his dad, and he got hit by a stray bullet that was fired by someone who was a predicate felon, who, had he been held, maybe that boy wouldn't have been shot. Or we saw with the Maplewood barbecue party that was going on this summer where, there was a lot of gunshots fired. Turns out several of the people who fired those shots killed 2, injured 5 others. They're predicate felons. Like, if they had been held, if somebody had done an assessment like what I'm proposing, they could have been held. They could have been getting maybe services that they need. But the bottom line is maybe we wouldn't have the victims.
Yeah, the judges have been a source of consternation for me because regardless of party, it has seemed that they're looking for reasons to release people, even when maybe it's within their scope with even the current system to find ways to hold people. So I'm just curious about the bill is if, for instance, if you commit a felony and then you get picked up on an A-miss, is it mandatory that they be held in custody, or is it the judge's discretion where they just have the option to hold them in the custody?
So a couple of comments there. Under the PROTECT Act, the courts would be required to perform this standardized assessment on each person who's been accused of a Class A or a felony. They'd be required to interview the person, and then within 48 hours, they'd be required to render a decision on whether or not that person should be held pretrial or not. So that's what I like about this bill too, right?
Okay.
It creates, if you will, like an even playing field, a standardized form for everyone to use, a standardized process. But I do have to say, and this is a bigger picture concern for me, right? When you have the Chief Justice of the state of New York, Rowan Wilson, at his State of the Judiciary address in February, talking about how he's going to put more pressure on the judges to give reduced sentences. He doesn't want to see any more of these long sentences. And you have standing next to him the commissioner of docks who's saying he's agreeing to it. And both of them are saying that they want to pass the second act look, give people, reduced sentences, let people out early. And like, what message are you sending to our judges? And for me, what's more disgusting is what message are you sending to our law enforcement and to the victims and the victims' families? And that's where there's a lot more that needs to be done. But I tried to be very careful in constructing the PROTECT Act with the sheriff and others to do something that people on both sides of the aisle, I was hoping, would embrace. They'd see it, as you said, as common sense.
Yeah, and the one thing I always come back to is people, not just everyone misses this, is that criminals pay attention. And when criminals they sense a weakness in the system, they exploit it. And they're brilliant at what they do. They're brilliant at committing crimes. And if they find a weakness, if they find that there's no recourse for their actions, then they will exploit that and keep doing it. So they also have to be considered in these decision making. What message does it say to criminals?
Right. I agree. There were some concerns that were raised about people who didn't want us to change the way that the bail process currently works. They're worried about people being held longer than they should be. But this bill specifically says a decision has to be rendered within 48 hours. So I think we address that issue. This bill also says to our judges and our courts, if a person has mental health needs, you need to utilize other sections of the law to make sure that they're getting timely services that they need. I've had a few people call me out and say on that 48-hour piece, it says it must be completed in 48 hours unless there are extenuating circumstances, and they don't want the extenuating circumstances. But we need that because if the person needs to be hospitalized, if the person needs those mental health services, they may not be fit to go through the assessment within that 48-hour period. I think it's a well-rounded bill. I've had so many people who helped us draft it. The sheriff engaged the consortium, which is comprised of business owners, religious leaders from the community, from people. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say most of the people who helped work on this, they weren't on my side of the political aisle. They were on the other side, and they're sick and tired of seeing what's happening in their communities and to their families, and they want changes, common sense changes.
Yeah, Senator. The one part about the bill relative to the mental health. Obviously, I was a hostage negotiator for over 20 years with the Rochester Police Department, and that part of me knows that even though I was trying to negotiate somebody out of a house that did something that was really bad, there was a mental health aspect in some instances, and I think that you and Sheriff Baxter covered all the bases here. You basically wrote a bill that said, "Hey, folks, hold on a second. There should be modifications to certain things relative to the criminal justice reform in 2020. One is the dangerousness provision. Is this person fit to be in the community because of their danger, because there's a danger element there? Or is there a danger element plus a mental health component, and you're trying to get that criminal mental health services?" And it's just unbelievable to me that anyone that would vote against this, it really would shock my mind. It really does.
And to your point, and I think both of you would know more about this than I do, but what I've heard from so many members of law enforcement is if they had the ability to hold someone for 48 hours, sometimes that's all the time that's needed to de-escalate a situation or to get the person the assistance, the care, the help that they need.
Senator, one of the things that I had done doing some research relative to you coming on, can you correct me if I'm wrong? New York State is literally uniquely positioned as the only state that does not allow courts to consider public safety when making pretrial custody decisions.
That's absolutely correct. New York State is the only state in the entire nation. Think about that. Even California.
I was just going to say, even California.
It's crazy. Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
That's
yeah.
California, Connecticut, New Jersey. Oh my God, Rhode Island. All the liberal states, even they have a public safety concern relative. Well, Senator, we can't thank you enough for
one quick thing,
on.
Johnny.
Yeah, go ahead.
I really like the aspect where you have a third party almost like Johnny in the federal system with the federal probation there, where they give a determination on whether someone should be held or not held. It's on the record. The judge can make his own decisions, but at least someone has stated this guy should be held or this woman should be held. And if the judge chooses to go a different option, at least it's on the record as far as what was recommended. I really like that aspect.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could, before we wrap up, just put a plug out there. Right now, folks can go to my website or my Facebook page and find the link. We have a petition out there to pass the PROTECT Act. We have so many letters of support, of course, from all the consortiums from across the state of New York, from Lifespan, who thinks this bill would be a great way to address some of the repeat offenders and crimes against seniors in our communities, from the New York State Sheriff's Association. But we're looking for other organizations and individuals who support this common sense change to sign our petition or to send us letters of support.
So you're definitely getting pushback from the other side of the aisle, though. This isn't like a bipartisan thing at this point where you're getting some support. It's pretty much right down the middle as far as Republicans are behind it, Democrats are not.
Unfortunately, that is the case. And so my goal is, there's no way this is going to come to the Senate floor this year. We're building support now, and we'll continue to build support through the summer and fall so that when we come back to session in January, we're really going to push hard, hopefully with a lot of support from a lot of organizations and individuals, to say to Governor Hochul, look, we need you to tuck this into the New York State budget, just like you did with Discovery and some other things.
Awesome.
That's phenomenal. Senator Pam Helming, representing the 54th District in New York State. We can't thank you enough for joining the Crime Dawg podcast. This is unbelievable, okay? I mean, you have a Republican senator from New York State. You have a Democratic sheriff. They came together. They merged their brains and said, hey, this isn't working. Here's a proposal. Now, what I like about it is if you go on to Senator Helming's website, there's literally 4 points. It's like, hey, guys, here it is. Boom, boom, boom. This is not a 9,000-page bill where this is buried in page 7,064, right? I mean, it's common sense, bro.
But there's a big problem, Johnny, and I've said it for a long time now, and people hate me that I say it, but no one loves a violent criminal more than a Democrat.
Amen,
that just,
brother.
in New York State, that is just the facts. And it's backed up by stuff like this, that where they vote and what they decide to do supports the criminal, and it does not support law-abiding citizens. It actually puts them at risk.
Yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer, and I'm not trying to push it. This is exactly what you and I have been discussing since we started our podcast, whatever it was, 18 months ago. We've talked about it on our live show on iHeartRadio. We've discussed this ad nauseum. I mean, this is something that should be bipartisan. I hope that the Democratic senators all over the state do reconsider and they just don't vote against it just because it was presented by a Republican senator,
I agree. Hopefully we can get some senators in our area to stop playing with trains and start focusing on public safety.
Well, folks, listen, if you like that episode, stick with us for future episodes. If you want to see what we've done in the past, you could check us out on our YouTube channel and Spotify channel, or you can go to our website, thecrimedawgpodcast.com. That is thecrimedawgpodcast.com. If you can't get enough of David and I, we have a live show called the Crime Dawg Live Show every Saturday, noon to 1 p.m. on iHeartRadio Wham 1180. If you are on that Rochester dial, clicking on over every Saturday from noon to 1. Folks, thanks for sticking with us on this episode. We'd like you to stick around for future episodes. But like my brother-in-law, Frankie Grassi, says, if you can't make it, who cares?